A millionaire falls in love with an abandoned woman who slept with her children at the train station. Rain whispered softly against the iron roof of the Lahore railway station. Its rhythmic tapping drowned beneath the chaos of departing trains and the cries of vendors hawking chai. Among the many huddled masses on Platform 5, there she sat, Ameera, her shawl threadbare, her eyes tired but fierce, curled protectively around her two sleeping children. Her daughter's face was pressed into her chest, and her son clung to her side, his hand clutching a broken toy car with wheels long gone. She hadn't slept properly in days, not since her husband vanished into the city's underworld chasing quick money and darker pleasures. The rent collectors had thrown them out weeks ago. The train station became their refuge, a place that didn't ask questions. Somewhere across town, in a high-rise of glass and steel, Rayyan Malik's life ran like a machine. Young, enigmatic, and brutally successful, he was the kind of man people admired and envied in equal measure. CEO of a tech empire, he moved in circles where the scent of leather-bound contracts and old scotch dominated every room. Yet inside, he carried a loneliness money could not touch. Not a soul in his penthouse noticed that he often stared out his floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the world below like a boy locked in a tower. The morning they met was not romantic. It wasn't even supposed to happen. His black BMW had broken down, first time in years. Irritated, he stepped out into the drizzle, loosened his tie, and called his driver. But while waiting, he wandered aimlessly, drawn by the scent of chai and the distant sound of a lullaby. That's when he saw her. She wasn't begging. She wasn't even looking at anyone. She just sat with a calm dignity that struck him, her hand gently combing her son's damp hair. She looked like someone who had once known love and had since buried it. Rayyan froze. Something unfamiliar tugged at him. Not pity, but awe. He bought 2 cups of chai from a vendor and approached her. "You shouldn't sit here in this rain," he said, offering her a cup. She looked up, startled. Her eyes narrowed. "I don't take money." "It's not money. It's tea." "Warmth," he said, kneeling down. Her gaze softened slightly. She took the cup with careful hands, warming her palms around it. "Thank you," she said quietly. That was it. No theatrics. No grand speeches. Just that moment. But it stayed with him like a melody that refused to fade. He returned the next day. Then again. And again. Sometimes he brought food. Once he brought coloring books. And slowly, the children began to smile. Ameera remained cautious, her pride tightly guarded. But Rayyan didn't push. He listened. Over time, her story unfolded in fragments. A village wedding at 19. A husband who made promises and broke all of them. A life that slowly crumbled beneath the weight of misplaced trust. "Why do you keep coming?" she asked one morning, her voice firmer than usual. He shrugged. "Because I think you're the only person I've met in a long time who looks at me without wanting anything." She laughed, a sound so rare it turned heads on the platform. "You're wrong. I want everything. But only for them," she said, pointing to her sleeping children. That night, Rayyan couldn't sleep. Ameera's words echoed louder than the wind brushing against his windows. He sat alone in his penthouse, stared at his spotless kitchen, his art-lined hallways, and realized nothing inside those walls had ever meant anything. The next morning, he made a decision. He offered her a job, not charity, a real opportunity. A position in the community kitchen his company supported. She hesitated. "I don't want to be your project," she said, her eyes hard. "You won't be," he promised. "But maybe we could build something together. Something real." She studied him, trying to read between his carefully chosen words. "You don't know me," she said quietly. "I'd like to," he replied. The weeks that followed were not easy. Ameera worked hard, too hard. She arrived before everyone and left last, often with sore feet and blistered palms. But she never complained. Her children were enrolled in a small school nearby. She found a room in a women's shelter. And slowly, a semblance of life returned to her eyes. Rayyan visited often, not with fanfare, but with presence. He'd sit across from her during lunch breaks, sometimes talking, sometimes just sharing silence. There was something in that silence that healed them both. One evening, as monsoon clouds painted the sky in streaks of gray and violet, Ameera found herself outside his office. He had called her nervously. She entered, unsure. He stood by the window, the city stretched behind him. In his hand was a small velvet box. Not an engagement ring, not yet. But a pair of tiny gold earrings, for her daughter. "I saw her admiring them the other day at the bazaar," he said, his voice gentle. Ameera's lips trembled. She looked at the box, then at him. "You don't have to fix us," she whispered. "I'm not trying to," he said. "I'm just hoping you'll let me walk beside you." For the first time in a long while, Ameera stepped forward, not with fear, but with trust. The walls she'd built, brick by painful brick, began to crumble. And in that moment, high above the city where two worlds had once seemed galaxies apart, something rare and delicate was born. Not charity, not romance spun from pity, but a partnership shaped by quiet courage. She didn't speak right away. Her fingers hovered over the little box, as though afraid it might vanish if she touched it. The hush in the office was so profound she could hear the clock ticking near the bookshelf. And then, very slowly, she closed her hand over the earrings and held them to her chest. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thin as the rain beginning to fall outside. "You don't know what this means to her. To me." "I think I'm starting to understand," Rayyan said. She looked at him then, truly looked, past the fine suit and the polished shoes and the reputation that trailed him wherever he went. She saw the tired man beneath all that, the man who seemed relieved she hadn't recoiled from him. That evening, she walked home carrying the little box, feeling something warm spreading through her chest. She wondered if this was what hope felt like, fragile but alive. Her children were waiting when she returned to the shelter, their eyes bright as they tumbled into her lap. She showed them the gift, and her daughter gasped with joy, pressing the earrings against her earlobes and spinning around the narrow room. Ameera watched her twirl, a bittersweet ache blossoming behind her ribs. For the first time in years, her daughter looked like a child again, not a survivor. At work, people began to notice. Ameera no longer kept her head down. She met people's eyes, spoke without apology, smiled without shame. The other women in the kitchen respected her resilience. Even the managers saw how she transformed every space she entered with a quiet discipline. Rayyan continued to visit. Sometimes he stayed only minutes, dropping off new supplies for the children's learning corner. Other times he lingered, rolling up his sleeves to help chop vegetables. The staff would steal glances, whispering behind their palms. A millionaire in the company of a woman who once slept on a train platform. Impossible, they said. Yet there he was, laughing softly at something she'd said, as though nothing in the world mattered more. One morning, Ameera found a small envelope tucked inside her apron pocket. She opened it slowly, puzzled. Inside was a folded note in Rayyan's elegant handwriting. Asterisk, if you ever want a place that is yours, not borrowed, not temporary, I'll help you find it. No conditions. No expectations. Just because everyone deserves a home. Asterisk. Her throat tightened. She closed the note, pressing it flat against her heart. She knew better than to trust too quickly. But somehow she believed him. When she finally approached him to talk about it, she found him alone in the small office adjoining the kitchen. He was staring at a photograph, one she'd never seen before. "Is that your mother?" she asked gently. He looked up, startled. Then he nodded. "She died when I was 12. My father remarried. We never spoke about her again." Ameera hesitated, then stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "Is that why you do this? Why you care so much?" He rubbed a hand over his jaw. "Maybe. She used to tell me that no one is beyond saving. Not even my father, no matter how cruel he could be. She believed in second chances." She thought of her own mother, buried in a village grave she hadn't visited in years. Her mother, too, had believed in love's power to mend what was broken. "I think your mother would be proud," she said softly. He met her gaze, and for a moment, the city fell away, the noise, the judgment, the memories. There was only the two of them, bound by something neither fully understood. Weeks passed. Ameera found a modest two-room flat on the edge of Gulberg, close enough to the shelter to feel safe, but far enough that it felt like a fresh beginning. Rayyan helped with the paperwork, but insisted she sign every line herself. "Your name on the lease," he said. "Your home." The day she moved in, she stood in the doorway long after the movers had left, her children already racing from one room to the next. She couldn't remember the last time she'd owned a key that opened her own door. Rayyan arrived later that afternoon, carrying a housewarming gift, new beds for the children, and a small potted plant for the kitchen window. "I didn't know what to bring," he admitted, suddenly looking sheepish. "This is perfect," she said, smiling. They shared tea at the little table by the window. Outside, the monsoon clouds hung low, threatening another downpour. But inside, the air felt bright, even festive. "Does it feel real yet?" he asked quietly. She looked around. At the cracked tiles she didn't mind, the curtains she'd chosen herself, the laughter of her children echoing down the hall. "It feels like a life I almost forgot I deserved," she murmured. He reached across the table, covering her hand with his. The touch was gentle but steady. "You do deserve it," he said. "More than anyone I know." And in that moment, she realized something had shifted irrevocably between them. She no longer saw him as the man who'd rescued her from a platform. He was just Rayyan, a man with wounds of his own, who had found something like redemption in the quiet company of a woman who'd once had nowhere left to go. The weeks that followed unfolded like the slow opening of a flower, tentative, beautiful, inevitable. Ameera settled into the little flat, as if it had been waiting for her all along. Each morning, she woke before dawn to prepare breakfast, braiding her daughter's hair, folding her son's school uniform with the same reverence she once reserved for prayers. Rayyan kept visiting, though never in a way that overwhelmed her. Some days he appeared with fresh groceries or a new set of books for the children. Other times he simply knocked on her door with nothing in his hands except an unspoken wish to see her face. The neighbors watched their quiet rituals with curiosity, but Ameera no longer felt the sharp edge of shame that had once accompanied every whispered remark. She'd earned her place here, and she would not let anyone strip her of that dignity again. One evening, as the air turned cool and fragrant with the promise of rain, Rayyan invited her to see the orphanage project he'd begun funding near the old railway station. It was a red brick building, still unfinished, but already alive with the energy of children painting walls and unpacking crates of supplies. Ameera felt a lump rise in her throat as she watched a small girl tug on Rayyan's sleeve, showing him her watercolor of a blue house. He knelt beside her, listening as though no voice had ever mattered more. "You were right," she murmured when they stepped aside. "Everyone deserves a home." He studied her face, the lines softening around her mouth, the shadows in her eyes finally receding. "Even me?" he asked, a note of vulnerability threading through his voice. She hesitated, feeling the weight of all they had been to each other. Strangers, companions, a mirror reflecting their secret loneliness. Then she reached for his hand and folded it between both of hers. "Especially you," she said. They stood in the courtyard as dusk fell, neither needing to say more. When the orphanage opened 3 months later, she was the first to walk through its gates. She had accepted Rayyan's offer to become its director, a role that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. On the first day, she gathered the children in a circle, her own two sitting proudly beside her, and told them a story about a girl who had lost everything and still found a way to keep her heart open. "She believed," Ameera said, her voice steady, "that kindness is not weakness, that love is not charity, that sometimes the people who seem the most broken are the ones who teach us how to live." Her eyes drifted across the courtyard to where Rayyan stood near the doorway, hands tucked into his pockets, watching her with an expression so full it almost took her breath away. When the children scattered to explore, he walked to her side. "I can't remember the last time I felt proud of anything," he confessed quietly. "But standing here, watching you, I think maybe this is what it feels like." She turned to him, feeling her heart unlock the last of the old doors she'd bolted shut. "Then don't stand there," she whispered. "Come here. Be part of this." He stepped forward, and when he slipped his arm around her waist, it felt like something final had clicked into place, a promise neither of them needed to voice. Over the months that followed, they wove a life neither could have imagined on that rainy day at the train station. It wasn't always simple. Ameera still carried scars from years of disappointment, and Rayyan still struggled with his own ghosts. But in each other, they had found a space where their wounds were not liabilities, but proof they had survived. Every Sunday morning, they sat on the little balcony of her flat, sipping chai while her children played hopscotch in the courtyard below. Sometimes he read aloud to her from the novels he loved, his voice low and patient. Other times they simply watched the sunrise in silence, grateful they no longer had to face it alone. One morning, nearly a year after their first meeting, Rayyan arrived earlier than usual. Ameera was in the kitchen rolling out parathas, her hair pulled into a loose braid. She looked up in surprise when she heard his footsteps, wiping her hands on her apron. "You're early," she said. He didn't answer. Instead, he crossed the small kitchen in 2 strides and took her hands in his. For a long moment, he just stood there, studying her face as though he were trying to memorize every detail. "I've spent my life building things," he began, voice unsteady. "Companies, foundations, buildings. But none of it ever mattered the way this does." Her breath caught as he reached into his coat pocket, and withdrew a small box, the same deep velvet as the one he'd once given her daughter. "This isn't a rescue," he said softly. "And it isn't repayment. It's just me asking if you'll let me stay by your side. If you'll let me be part of the life you've rebuilt." Ameera felt the world tilt gently on its axis. For so long, she had convinced herself that love was a door closed to her forever. But here it was, unexpected and tender, offered without condition. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she nodded, unable to speak past the swell of emotion in her throat. He drew her into his arms, holding her as if she were something precious he'd searched for all his life. In the quiet that followed, as dawn lit the kitchen in soft gold, Ameera knew this was the ending she had never dared to dream of. A story that didn't erase her past but honored it. A love born not out of pity, but from the shared understanding of what it meant to begin again. And when her children burst in moments later, their laughter filling the little flat, she realized that for the first time in years, she was not merely surviving. She was home.